It is said there was once a light that never dimmed, a light not born of flame or sun but something quieter, more patient. It breathed within the walls of an old monastery, hidden deep in the folds of winter, where snow fell without sound and time seemed to rest upon the roofs like dust. The world beyond those walls was breaking apart. Kingdoms burned, empires unraveled, roads vanished beneath years of forgetting. But inside the cloister, a few voices still murmured in the half-dark. They were monks, their faces pale in the candle's hush, their quills whispering across parchment, each stroke a heartbeat of an age refusing to die. Beneath the library, behind a narrow stairway of uneven stone, there was said to be a lamp that burned without oil. The brothers called it lux perennis, the perpetual light. It glowed softly, like a breath that had learned to live forever, and no one could say when it first began. Some believed it was divine, left by angels who walked in silence through the birth of night. Others said it was older still, the remnant of a civilization whose name had been erased. Those who descended to see it often returned changed, their eyes distant, their voices softened, as though they had glimpsed something the heart could not bear to remember. The monastery endured while the world fell to ruin. Villages vanished, roads turned to mud, and yet the cloister's bells continued to ring, clear and cold. Perhaps it was faith that shielded it, or fear, or something older that moved unseen through its stones. Every evening, as dusk gathered in the arches, an old monk named Odrin descended into the lower vaults. His candle trembled in the air as he knelt before the lamp. The flame within did not waver. It glowed with the steadiness of stars. In the dark, Odrin whispered his prayer. Let what was once known remain unbroken. Let the light remember where memory cannot. It is whispered that their prayers were not new but inherited. Words passed down from those who came long before the church, when temples were carved into stone hills and songs were sung to the turning of the sky. The cloister itself was built upon the bones of such a temple. In the lower passages, symbols were carved into the walls, spirals, suns, and moons bound in circles. Some glowed faintly when touched by moonlight, though none could explain how. Perhaps the light that the brothers guarded was the echo of that earlier world, a secret flame kept alive through the centuries by those who understood that knowledge must sometimes hide to survive. In the scriptorium above, the monks copied and copied, their quills tracing lines older than their own faith. They no longer knew what they preserved. They only knew it mattered. The air there smelled of parchment, wax, and something more elusive, the scent of time itself. When they wrote, the sound was like rain upon stone, soft and endless. Shadows flickered along the walls, bending with the rhythm of the lamps, and sometimes, in the stillness between the turning of pages, it felt as though another presence leaned close, invisible but listening. Outside, the sky darkened. The Empire's voice fell silent. The last libraries burned. Yet within those walls, the perpetual light continued. Travelers who passed nearby claimed to see a faint radiance drifting through the fog, pale as breath, as though the monastery itself was exhaling light into the night. Some said they heard a low hum, like distant chanting carried through stone. The church sent men to see what lived there, but they found nothing. Only monks at prayer, the flicker of ordinary candles, the echo of their own steps returning to them. Still, something lingered in the air that none could name, and they left uneasy, unwilling to speak of what they felt. Years passed. The world grew darker. One by one, the monks disappeared. Only Odrin remained, old and thin as parchment. He still descended each night to the vault, his candle trembling in his hand. The light within the lamp had dimmed, not gone, but receding, as though it wished to sleep. He began to write again, not a psalm or sermon, but a memory. He wrote of the lamp and the silence it guarded, of how the light had watched over them while the world forgot itself. On the final line, his quill broke. The ink spilled across the parchment in the shape of a falling star. He wrote 3 words beneath it: Lux non moritur. The light does not die. When morning came, the bell did not ring. Snow drifted through the open doorways. The benches were empty. The garden lay still beneath frost. No one remained. Centuries followed. The monastery crumbled into ruin, its stones scattered among ivy and moss. Travelers avoided it, saying the air there felt heavy, as though listening. Those who lingered swore that at certain hours, when the moon was full and the wind still, a faint glow rose from beneath the earth, a shimmer, as if the soil itself remembered the light. Archaeologists came later, and in the hollow of what had been the library, they found fragments. Shards of glass fused with metal that could not be identified, pieces of parchment written in a script that dissolved when touched by sunlight. One page remained whole. On it, drawn faintly in silver dust, was a spiral within a circle, the same symbol once carved into the vault stones. Perhaps the light was never a flame. Perhaps it was the persistence of memory, the will of truth to remain alive even when no one speaks it. Some say the brothers had discovered the secret of eternal fire. Others think they preserved an idea so pure, it took the shape of light to survive. Maybe both are true. Maybe neither. What matters is that it still waits, somewhere beneath the ruined chapel, behind the veil of soil and silence, breathing. If one walks among the remains at night, when the world sleeps and snow begins to fall, there are moments when the air itself glows. Just a shimmer, a breath, a suggestion. The ground seems to pulse, faintly, as if the stones remember what it felt like to be alive. And if you whisper then, very softly, Lux non moritur, some say you will hear it. The almost inaudible scratch of a quill in the dark, a page turning, a voice reciting words too old to understand. Perhaps it is only the wind, or perhaps it is Odrin, still keeping watch, still writing in the dark, still feeding the light that remembers when no one else does. For there are flames that live beyond the reach of time. They burn without smoke, without sound, within the ruins of faith and the hush of forgotten ages. They are not meant to be found, only felt, like the heartbeat of the world when it thinks no one is listening. The cloister is gone, but the breath of its light remains. It flickers behind the veil of centuries, a quiet pulse beneath the earth. And in that hidden place where silence gathers its strength, the last ember of an ancient memory still waits. Calm, patient, eternal. The light that was never meant to fade. It is said that somewhere between two sunsets, a kingdom vanished. Not burned, not conquered, not swallowed by sea or sand. Simply gone, as though it had folded itself into shadow and slipped out of the world's memory. Only a few scattered chronicles whisper of it now, written by trembling hands that did not understand what they had seen. They called it Virili, the kingdom between rivers, a realm of amber fields and quiet towers. Its people were known for their craft, weaving tapestries that shimmered like the northern lights, their threads said to be spun from the breath of dawn. The sound of their looms was once a music carried by wind across valleys, soft as rain on marble. Then, one season, the music stopped. Travelers passing through spoke of an unnatural calm that fell over the land, of skies that dimmed too early, of birds that refused to fly. The last sunset they saw there burned longer than any before, a light stretched thin, as though the heavens themselves hesitated to close the day. And then silence. When morning came, Virili was gone. Only fields of grass remained, rolling endlessly where the roads once lay. The towers were dust. The riverbeds were empty, dry as bone. Some say the ground itself was smooth, as if wiped clean by an unseen hand. Others claim to have found traces. A single stone etched with spirals, a cup still warm when discovered, the faint outline of footprints that faded as they watched. Whispers tell that the kingdom had angered the stars. Their scholars, it is said, had begun to study the heavens not as worshippers, but as rivals. They charted constellations with too much precision, claiming that even fate could be measured. In their marble observatory, a circle of columns open to the night, they recorded the patterns of celestial fire, believing they could predict the fall and rise of kings. And perhaps for a moment they did. But the stars do not like to be seen too clearly. They prefer the reverence of mystery. It is said that one night, when the astronomers aligned mirrors across the plane to reflect the light of the constellations, the sky dimmed. The stars, all at once, turned their faces away. The heavens became blank, black as unspoken thought. And then the mirrors cracked, one by one. A chain of shattering that echoed across the kingdom like thunder rolling beneath the ground. That was the night before the vanishing. No one knows what truly happened, only that when the dawn tried to rise, it found nothing left to illuminate. Some believe Virali slipped into another world, carried by its own reflections, like a dream that no longer wished to wake. Others think it still exists, but invisible, veiled behind the thin fabric of time. On certain evenings, shepherds in nearby hills say they see lights in the mist, the outline of towers, the faint sound of bells. But when they draw near, there is only fog, and the echo of water flowing where no river runs. Long after the disappearance, pilgrims came to the site to pray. They built small shrines from broken stone, leaving offerings of bread, feathers, and mirror shards. They believed that in honoring what was lost, they could keep the rest of the world from slipping away too. The grass grew thick around their altars, roots curling into the remains of what might have been foundations. Even now, when the wind moves across those plains, it carries a strange hum. Not quite music, not quite voice, as if the earth is trying to remember its own song. Somewhere, buried beneath layers of soil, there may still lie a doorway. A single threshold of polished obsidian, smooth as the surface of still water. They say that if one touches it under a blood-red sunset, the stone trembles, and for a heartbeat, you can feel warmth, as though a city still breathes beneath your palm. But to linger is dangerous, for those who stay too long are said to vanish too, leaving only the echo of footsteps fading into nothing. Monks who later recorded the legend wrote that the kingdom was punished for trying to preserve too much beauty, that its people wished to stop time, to hold eternity in their weavings, their towers, their starlit mirrors. And so time took them instead. Perhaps the truth is gentler. Perhaps Virali was simply too perfect to remain. It is a strange comfort to think that somewhere, just beyond the reach of sight, it continues. That its fields still glow under a sun that never sets, its people walking through light that does not age, its river singing a song no ear here can hear, a place not lost, but merely misplaced, waiting for memory to call it back. It is said that on rare nights, between dusk and dawn, when the world itself pauses to breathe, a faint shimmer spreads across the horizon, the color of glass, the hue of forgotten things. Some call it heat, others mirage. But the old ones say it is Virali, brushing against the waking world, a memory trying to remember itself. And if you stand very still, in that half-light between two suns, you may feel the ground hum beneath your feet. A pulse, slow and steady, like a kingdom still dreaming beneath the veil of silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it never left at all. For some places do not die. They simply turn sideways into the unseen, waiting for the moment when the heart, half asleep, still knows how to find them. It is said there once was an emperor who wished to see eternity. Not to rule it, not to conquer it, but simply to understand what lived behind the thin veil of his own reflection. In his vast, forgotten empire, where domes shone like suns and the scent of cedar drifted through endless halls, he ordered a mirror to be made, a mirror unlike any other. It was to be polished from the heart of black volcanic glass, smooth as frozen smoke, so dark that it reflected not faces, but souls. The artisans who shaped it worked in silence, for the emperor forbade the sound of tools to echo in the chamber. They ground and polished for 40 nights, until their fingertips bled, and when the final layer of ash was brushed away, they found their own eyes staring back at them. Not bright, but endless, swallowed by the mirror's quiet depth. When they carried it to the emperor, it was said that even the torches dimmed, as if unwilling to disturb what was inside. He placed it within the inner sanctum of his palace, a room where no windows opened, no voices entered, and each night he sat before it alone, watching the surface until dawn. At first, it showed him what any mirror would, the outline of his crown, the weary angles of his face, the gold threads woven into his robe. But as the nights passed, his reflection began to shift. The shadows behind him grew longer. The air within the chamber cooled. Sometimes, when he blinked, he thought he saw another face looking back. Not his own, but someone older, perhaps younger, perhaps not human at all. The courtiers whispered that the emperor had become obsessed. He stopped holding council, stopped riding through the gardens, stopped sleeping. Servants brought his meals to the threshold, but the dishes returned untouched. Those who entered to fetch them said the mirror glowed faintly, like a black star, and that the emperor's eyes reflected nothing at all. Then one morning he emerged. His voice was calm, his hands steady. He told his advisors that the gods had spoken to him through the glass, that he had seen the true shape of the world, not as it appeared, but as it remembered itself. That night, he ordered the mirror to be covered, veiled in white silk and forbidden to all. No one was to enter the chamber again. But curiosity is older than law. One of the emperor's scribes, a quiet man named Lucan, could not resist. He had copied the chronicles of kings for 20 years, yet never written a word of his own. On the 7th night after the decree, he crept into the chamber while the palace slept. The air was still, the torchlight dim. He pulled aside the silk veil. What he saw, none can say, for he wrote nothing afterward. But when they found him the next morning, his hair had turned white, his hands folded over his heart. Upon the floor beside him, someone had traced a single phrase into the dust. It does not reflect, it remembers. From that night on, the mirror began to change. Servants claimed it no longer showed reflections at all, only faint movements like smoke rising in water. When torches passed near it, their flames bent, pulled inward as though drawn toward another sky. Some nights, the emperor's attendants swore they heard whispers from behind the glass, fragments of voices, speaking in a language no one had ever known. Still, the emperor continued to visit it. He would sit before the mirror for hours, his breath misting upon its surface, his eyes unblinking. And those who dared to glance at him afterward said he seemed thinner, paler, as though some part of him stayed behind each time he looked. Then came the night of forgetting. It began with a stillness so deep it felt like the world had stopped breathing. The palace torches flickered out one by one, though no wind moved through the halls. The moon vanished behind clouds, and for the first time in living memory, the city fell completely dark. Only the chamber of the mirror still glowed, a faint, bluish light spilling beneath the door. Those who were awake heard a sound that was not quite thunder, not quite music. A low hum, as though the earth itself were remembering something it had long buried. The air grew heavy, metallic, and the scent of iron drifted through the corridors. Then silence. When dawn returned, the mirror was gone. So was the emperor. The guards who entered the chamber found the walls scorched, the floor covered in ash. In the center, where the mirror had stood, lay a single shard of obsidian, still warm to the touch. The empire mourned. Priests claimed the emperor had been taken by the gods, that he had crossed into the realm of reflection. But others believed he had simply vanished into his own creation, swallowed by the memory he sought to control. In the years that followed, droughts came, the harvest failed, and the empire's name was slowly erased from maps. It was as if the very idea of it had been forgotten. Centuries later, when wanderers found the ruins of that palace, they discovered a room blackened by fire, yet untouched by decay. In its center, half buried in dust, they found the mirror, whole once again, its surface unbroken. They carried it to the nearest monastery, hoping the brothers would preserve it. But the abbot, upon seeing his own reflection, ordered it sealed away beneath the chapel floor. He said it was not glass at all, but a doorway. In the centuries that followed, the mirror reappeared again and again, never for long, always in places on the edge of ruin. A merchant claimed to have seen it in Damascus, glowing faintly in the corner of an abandoned chapel. A sailor swore it was kept aboard a ship that vanished at sea without a trace. And once, during a plague in Florence, a healer spoke of a mirror that showed not faces, but the spirits of those soon to die, shimmering faintly like smoke. Each story carried the same warning, that to look too long was to forget the world behind you, that it did not reflect light, but fed upon it. It is said that the mirror did not show what was, only what had been, and when the weight of memory grew too great, It reached out, pulling its watchers into itself, folding them into the tapestry of all that had been forgotten. Perhaps that was its purpose all along. Not a curse, but a kind of balance, the universe reclaiming the reflections that had grown too proud to remain outside. There are quiet legends that claim the mirror still exists, somewhere beneath an abbey, perhaps, or hidden in a museum vault labeled only as obsidian artifact. At certain angles, when the light catches its surface, it is said that shapes move within, silhouettes that seem to turn and fade, like people glimpsed through fog. Some who have seen it swear they felt something stir behind their own eyes. A faint pull, a whisper that said, "Look closer." But the wise look away. For some truths are not meant to be known by daylight. They exist in the hush between breaths, in the space where light meets its own shadow. The mirror remains, patient as night, its surface waiting for another gaze to awaken it. And perhaps the Emperor is still there, seated in the reflection, watching. Perhaps he is no longer a man, but part of the mirror itself, one with the endless memory that called to him. When the candle burns low and the world grows quiet, there are moments when polished glass seems to darken of its own accord. And if one looks closely, for just an instant, one might see not their own face, but a faint figure standing behind, a king without a crown, eyes filled with centuries of silence. It is said he waits for the moment when the world forgets him completely, for only then will the mirror fade. Until then, it watches, it listens, it remembers, and in every shadow that falls upon its glass, another life, another name, another memory begins to hum, softly, endlessly, in the dark. It is said that when the bells fell silent and the streets filled with the breath of grief, there was a single cathedral where song continued like a thin thread of moonlight pulled across the night. The doors were heavy, the stone old and oceanic, and yet the air within moved as if stirred by wings. Outside, the world darkened, marked by the moon and by the ash of countless candles burning down to their last sigh. Inside, a choir gathered at dusk, faces veiled in hoods, hands folded over the ribs where the heart kept its quiet drum. They sang not for crowds, not for ceremony, but for the echo that dwells beneath the silence. Their voices rose gently, as if careful not to wake the sorrow sleeping in the pews, as if each note were a small light carried through rooms where no fire dared remain. Whispers tell us the city had become a map of closed shutters and quick footfalls, of carts that passed at dawn with shrouded forms and a single bell that did not ring. The river moved more slowly, the market square was emptied of laughter, and even the pigeons seemed to perch with their feathers tucked close, listening. Beneath that listening, a rumor took root, that song could call down mercy, that a breath shaped into praise might thread through the veil and steady the hands of the unseen. So they came to the cathedral one by one, not to be seen, not to be counted, but to stand in the farthest shadows and let the music draw a circle around the fear that kept them from sleep. The choirmaster was an old man whose eyes had the still blue of winter sky. He carried no staff, only a small leather book smoothed by the touch of decades. It is said he did not conduct so much as breathe, and the choir learned to follow that breath. He had lost his wife in a spring season when the lilacs bloomed too early and then turned black in a late frost. He had lost a son whose laughter was still a living wind in the cloisters. He had kept only the discipline of tone, the sacred weight of a well-placed rest, the way a single vowel held long enough could become an arch to walk beneath. At dusk he would light 3 candles at the foot of the altar and murmur a phrase in a tongue he never explained. Beneath the silence, the choir would answer, and the first chord would rise like incense, low and round, expanding until it touched the furthest stones. Not all voices returned each night. Some fell ill and were replaced by a softer echo, by an empty space that changed the harmony in ways only the attentive could feel. Some came back with a tremor where once there was calm. Some carried a new steadiness, as if the threshold had shown them the size of their own soul. When they sang the ancient modes, the cathedral seemed to tilt toward a place older than the city, older than the faith carved in its capitals, a place where sound was the first language and grief learned to breathe through music. People in the shadows closed their eyes and let the notes move through their bones like a tide withdrawing, returning, withdrawing again. In the far choir stall, A girl with hair the color of harvested wheat learned to spin a single tone into a thread so fine that even the dust motes in the moonbeam paused to listen. In those days, some believed the plague was a storm of stars fallen to earth, entering by breath and pulsing in the blood. Others believed it was a night sent to remember itself, a dark spiral returning for the debt of old forgetting. The brothers who kept the candles swore that each flame, if watched closely, revealed a small doorway through which the prayers of the ailing could pass like travelers on a narrow road. And the choir, obedient only to the quiet architecture of song, gave those travelers companions. Syllables shaped like lanterns, intervals stepped like stones across a river that had widened without warning. It is told that a woman came who had lost 3 children in a single week, and when she tried to speak, no sound formed. She stood at the back, marked by the moonlight from the high window, and held in her palm the tiny shoe of the youngest. The choir entered a chant with no words, only an open vowel that spilled like water onto the floor of the nave. The sound rose softly, spiraled upward, touched the ribs of the ceiling, and returned warmer, as if it had been blessed by passing through the eaves of heaven. The woman pressed the shoe to her chest and felt, for the length of a breath, that her sorrow had a shape larger than herself, a vessel that could hold her without breaking. She came again the next night, and the next, and each time the music remembered her before she could find the strength to be known. When fear grew too stern to bear, the choirmaster taught them to sing close to the ground. They learned pieces that moved like pilgrims, steady and low, each phrase a step, each cadence a place to drink and rest. He told them to picture a field after harvest, the stubble shining with frost, and to place the tone upon it as a small bowl of milk warmed for a child who has not slept. He told them to see the stars not as threats, but as letters in a lost script too large for a single night to read, and to trust that the script spelled comfort in a language older than breath. So they sang, and when the city's wind passed the great doors, it carried that comfort into streets where windows were curtains of linen and rooms were thick with quiet. One evening, the bell ringers did not come. The choirmaster climbed the narrow steps himself, the book tucked into his sleeve, and stood beneath the dark shapes of the bells. He did not pull the ropes. He placed his hand upon the cold metal and exhaled gently. The lower bell sounded without motion, a tone so deep it felt like the cathedral's own heart. It moved through the stone and along the floor and through the feet of those who stood in the aisles, until even those who did not believe in miracles believed in resonance. They sang with the bell, and the bell answered, and what passed between them needed no name. In the margin notes of the old leather book, which survived in a sacristy drawer long after the pages of the city's ledgers turned to dust, a hand had written small instructions. Leave more silence than you think you can, place the breath as if setting down bread for a stranger, do not fear the low notes that tremble, do not reach too soon for the bright ones are quick to burn, let them arrive like dawn when the earth is ready. Below the lines, a faint drawing. A spiral within a circle, star-marked. The emblem of the cathedral's mason who had carved his sign beneath the altar stone 2 centuries earlier. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps it meant everything. There were nights when the plague grew bold and the choir grew thin. The girl with the wheat-colored hair did not appear, and neither did the tenor whose laugh made birds hop along the sill. The alto with the warm contralto who brought apples wrapped in cloth sat in the shadows and pressed both hands over her ribs, as if to hold the ache from spilling. The choirmaster spoke little. He lit the 3 candles, breathed the phrase no one knew, and began a hymn that opened like a gate and widened like a road. The remaining voices slipped into it, fragile as moths, soft as the sound of a page turned by a tired hand. The hymn carried them, and for a while the names of the missing were not a wound but a garden where light, though thin, still threaded the leaves. Sometimes the door would open against the wind and a traveler would enter, face marked by the long road, cloak white with frost. He would stand, listening, and feel something in his chest loosen as if a knot had learned it was not required. Sometimes a nurse came with linens still warm from a fevered brow, standing far to the side, not wanting to carry her shadow deeper into the nave. She would lean against the stone and close her eyes, and when the choir lifted a phrase like a small bird and allowed it to rest upon the rafters, she would feel, for one quiet moment, the hand of a child she had comforted as he crossed that hidden bridge into the field where the grass does not wither. There were legends that the choir's song did more than soothe, that in the wake of certain antiphons, a cluster of houses found their breathing easier, that after a kyrie shaped like the curve of a crescent moon, the fever broke in a lane where 5 lamps had burned all night, that after the softest amen, a mother sat up and asked for broth. It is possible that none of this happened as told. It is possible that comfort, freely given, wrote its own miracles in the minds of those who needed to believe. But it is also possible that sound, when made with love and placed gently in the world, becomes a small medicine that knows its way in the dark. When spring came at last, timid and veiled, the choir did not rejoice. They sang as they had all winter, with the same measured breath, as if aware that joy, too, must be carried carefully lest it spill and leave the hands cold. The city opened an eye. The river ran less slowly. A cart rolled past with flowers gathered from gardens that had learned to grow without witness. In the cathedral, the choirmaster closed his book and ran his palm over the cover as one might bless a child's brow. He looked toward the stall where the wheat-haired girl once stood and lifted a note that did not ask for her return, only marked the place where she had been. The choir sustained it until the air changed, until the note felt finished of its own accord, until the silence after it was large enough to include everything the year had taken and everything it had left. It is said that many years later, travelers stopped to rest in the city and asked whether the famous choir still sang. The guide, a woman with a shawl embroidered in a pattern of stars, nodded toward the cathedral and said, "Listen." They stood in the square and heard nothing at first. Then a tone, so soft they could not tell if it came from the bell or the stone or their own blood. Another tone followed it, and then a third. Weaving a braid of sound, the wind lifted and laid upon their shoulders like a cloak against the evening. The guide smiled and told them the choir was never only voices. It was a way of placing breath into the world so that those who had none left might borrow it. In the sacristy drawer, beneath the leather book and a rosary with a missing bead, a scrap of parchment remained. On it, in a careful hand, for lines, "Leave the door open a finger's width. Let the low notes find the floor. Sing to what is hidden, not to what is heard. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen." No date, no signature. Only the spiral within the circle, drawn faintly in charcoal, smudged by a thumb. There are nights now, long after the plague has folded itself back into the dust from which all dark seasons rise, when the cathedral stands empty and the moon lies quiet on the worn flagstones. If you enter then and stand beneath the great window, and if you remember to let your shoulders fall and your breath become oceanic, you may hear it. Not music, not exactly. A presence shaped like music, a soft procession of vowels that remembers how to bless. A chord that never quite resolves because it knows that closure is a river mouth and the river has more to say. You may feel your own chest answer. An echo, a gate swung on its hinge, a candle waking. Perhaps nothing supernatural ever lived there. Perhaps a choir is only a gathering of humans agreeing to place their voices in the same bowl and pass it, brimful, to whoever needs a drink. Yet, in a world that forgets how to be gentle, such agreement is already a miracle. It leaves a mark on the air, a faint starlight woven into the rafters, a cadence beneath the silence. And so the legend remains, that when the sky went black and the streets grew still, a choir kept watch, and their song was a lantern held low, and those who had to cross the dark did not walk alone. If you listen as you leave, down the cold steps to the square where the dawn is learning to color the stones again, you may hear the last breath of the night's final chord resolve into the nest of your own lungs, and you may carry it with you like a small, warm stone. Long after the door closes and the city wakes, it will remain there, marked by the moon, remembering on your behalf. And when the world grows heavy once more, as it does, as it will, you may find that the note is waiting still, oceanic and veiled and sure, calling you to stand in some quiet place and hum very softly, so that another unseen traveler may discover that the air is kind and that the path through the dark is not empty but sung. It is said there was a monastery by the frozen sea where winter learned to speak in the soft grammar of wind, and where, when the moon was full and the tide drew a long breath against the rocks, a certain window glowed as if the night itself were writing. Behind that window sat a solitary scholar, a thin man with quiet bones, who wrote with an ink that could not be seen. By day his pages were blank. By night, under a slant of moonlight, his letters rose like mist from a field and then faded again, as if the page were breathing out secrets it could no longer bear to keep. Whispers tell us he was called Ansel, though he signed nothing and spoke seldom. He kept to the far cell beyond the cloister's herb garden, where the rosemary bent like old script and the snow lay in delicate runes upon the sill. His table was narrow, his candle kept low, for he had learned that too much flame frightened the words from forming. He wrote not with a quill, but with a reed cut by his own hand, sharpened against a stone he carried in a small pouch, a stone washed smooth by tides that remembered older shores. The ink he made from a ritual of patient things. Soot gathered from the bell tower's hidden corners, a pinch of crushed violet, a tear of resin from a tree that grew where the lightning had once touched the earth. He stirred it with ocean water. He kept it in a clay vial, stoppered with beeswax and a thread of hair. By day he walked the corridors and listened to silence. By night he returned to the window, and the page waited for him like a shore. The brothers let him be. They had come to trust the gentle ceremony of his hours, the way he would touch the doorframe before every entry, the way he would gather the candle flame with a cupped hand as one gathers a fledgling. They knew he copied nothing they assigned, and yet they did not protest. The abbot, who had seen wars come and go like seasons that forgot their names, simply nodded when Ansel passed and placed upon his palm a crumb of bread as if to sustain the hand that fed what could not be seen. In the refectory, at the long table where the smell of broth made a pale sanctuary around the weary, the brothers would glance at Ansel's sleeved wrist and feel the small hum of purpose that sometimes strayed like a warmth into the air, and they would eat more slowly, as if not to disturb the quiet animal of meaning that had decided to nest among them. Some nights the sea made a low, oceanic chant against the cliffs and the window flickered like a lighthouse turned inward. Ansel would lift his reed and begin. It is said his first line was always the same, beneath the silence. After that, the words found their own way. He wrote of things the monastery had no language for and yet had always known. Of a light hidden beneath a cloistered stone, of a kingdom that slipped behind the curtain between two sunsets, of a mirror that remembered rather than reflected, of a choir that taught grief how to breathe. He wrote in a script that shifted as it flowed, now Roman, now something older that moved like water over pebbles. He wrote as one stitches a wound, small and sure, drawing edges toward each other with a thread the body understands better than the mind. The pages looked empty in the daylight. The brothers teased him gently for his devotion to blankness. But at night, when the moon lifted itself like a slow bell over the sea, the words brightened. First a pale silver, then a blue like deep water, and then they vanished into the fibers again. Ansel would nod, as one nods to a friend who must keep walking. He believed this was the only way they could be kept. He would whisper, "Some truths grow thinner when pressed by day. Let them travel by night." Where had he learned the recipe for such ink? There were fragments in the library, lines tucked into margins, a rumor of recipes written in a hand that smelled of salt, a notation beside a prayer for travelers. For hidden script, gather the breath of ash and moon, bind with resin that new fire, let it rest in winter's mouth. Ansel had found these crumbs and followed them as if down a corridor where every door opened to a deeper chamber. He had failed many times. His first vials made stains that spread like bruises and would not hold a line. Others glimmered once and died. He kept a drawer full of attempts, parchments bearing the ghosts of letters that did not wish to live. He did not burn them. He believed even failed words left a shape that guided the hand. It is said the abbot tested him once. He came at dawn with a clean page and asked Ansel to write a psalm. Ansel obeyed. The abbot watched the reed move and saw nothing. He frowned and left, thinking the scholar had finally gone too far into the forest of his own thought. But that night he returned alone. He stood before the window as the tide turned and saw, slowly, a psalm rise from the page like breath upon glass, the plea of a weary heart that wished to keep vigil without naming its grief. He pressed his hand upon the parchment and felt it warm, as if the words were small animals traveling beneath the skin of the page. He did not speak of it to the brothers. He began, instead, to leave a small bowl of honey in the scriptorium each morning, the way one leaves sweetness at the threshold for a guest who arrives after everyone has gone to bed. Ansel's work grew into a long braid of nights. He numbered nothing. He titled nothing. He kept each leaf wrapped in linen and tied with the same length of twine. In the center of every first line, faint as a star behind thin cloud, he drew the spiral within the circle, that ancient sign that had followed him since boyhood, when he first traced it with a stick in low-tide sand and watched the water blur it back into memory. He did not know what it meant. He only knew it belonged at the gate of whatever he was building. There were small visitations. A pilgrim who could not sleep stood outside his cell and asked for a story that did not require hope but still allowed breath to ease. Ansel spoke through the door, shy as a child, and told the pilgrim of a bell that sometimes rang of its own accord when history trembled. The man listened with his head against the wood. When the tale ended, he exhaled and left a sprig of thyme on the sill. A young brother, heavy with questions that could not be answered by doctrine, slipped into the cell one night and found Ansel sleeping with his head upon the desk, one hand on the clay vial as if it were a small animal that might be startled by waking. He noticed a page half-written, the letters bright as frost. He read a single line before it faded. Where memory fades, the sea remembers. He backed out, heart steadying, and returned to his chores with an inward light that made the day seem less loud. The world outside continued its old unravelings. News arrived folded inside bread. Roads broken by armies that never learned the shape of mercy. Villages stripped to the grain of their beams. Fields marked by hooves and smoke. The brothers prayed and harvested and repaired and slept. Ansel listened, took in the tattered names, and laid them gently into his pages. He never wrote of battle. He wrote of breath, of doors left ajar, of the way a mother held her child's head when fever tried to make a small room inside the skull. He wrote of the moon's patient grammar, of stones that remembered fire long after their surface cooled. He wrote of the way a name spoken in an empty room still knows how to find the one who needs it. There was a winter when ice drew bars across the well and the sea sang in a voice like iron. The brothers' hands cracked in the wash water. The choir moved their mouths around fewer notes, guarding breath like lamp oil. Ansel's candle burned lower each night, and the ink thickened. He warmed the vial at his heart beneath his robe. He spoke to it as one speaks to a traveler who has walked far. Rest, little knight, we have more to carry. He dreamed of corridors where every wall was a page and every page a field at dusk, and he woke with the feeling that someone had kissed his forehead and told him to keep going. Then came the blanketing, a quiet calamity the brothers did not at first see. One night, under a full moon large as a plate laid upon the sea, Ansel unwrapped the earlier leaves and found them empty. Pages that had blossomed with blue and silver words were smooth as snow. He lifted them to the light. Nothing. He breathed upon them. Nothing. He warmed them at the candle. Nothing. He held them to the window, and for a heartbeat there was the faintest prickle, a suggestion of script, like frost gathering, and then it was gone. He did not cry out. He pressed his palm to the linen bundle and bowed his head as one bows to a tide that will not be argued with. In the morning he brought the bundle to the abbot. The old man touched the cloth as if touching the brow of someone who had traveled beyond his reach. He asked no questions. He said only, not all ink is meant for keeping. Some is a corridor the knight must walk through. He returned the pages to Ansel and added, after a long pause, perhaps the words have gone where words go to learn their next shape. Ansel returned to his cell with the lightness of a man who has finally been told that the ache he carries is the shape of the work itself. He began again. The reed moved. The invisible ink darkened, brightened, faded. He wrote less about the things that needed to be seen and more about the spaces that hold seeing. He wrote the breath between notes, the pause before a bell, the way the moon leaves a soft ladder on the sea for the mind to climb and come back changed. He wrote as if writing were not the point, but the listening that made writing possible. A rumor traveled with the herring boats that spring. In a city of stone far south, A hidden library had been found beneath a field, shelves intact, air as sweet as an old dream. The brothers gathered the tale the way they gathered herbs, careful not to crush the leaves. Ansel smiled when he heard it, not for the discovery itself, but for the proof that memory burrows and blooms in places no one thinks to search. That night he wrote a page that glowed brighter than any before and then vanished completely, as if it had been satisfied to exist only for the time it took to reach the one who needed it most. Years lifted and set down like waves. Ansel's hair whitened to the color of scraped vellum. His reed wore smooth where his fingers held it, and the stone in the pouch thinned from loyal service. The brothers aged beside him, some stepping through the last doorway with their hands open, some lingering at the threshold as if reluctant to wake from a kind dream. The abbot died one winter morning as the frost traced spider silk letters on the glass. The new abbot, gentler than spring rain, placed Ansel's clay vial on the altar for a night and prayed without words. In the scriptorium, a novice copied a psalm and in the margin drew, without knowing why, a spiral within a circle, smudging it as he closed the book. When Ansel's time began to fold, he did not fear the closing of the page. He gathered his bundles, linen-wrapped, twine-tied, smelling faintly of salt and resin, and carried them to the lower vault. Beneath the chapel, where the stone was older than the prayer set upon it, he found a narrow recess shaped like two hands cupped together. He placed the pages there. He whispered, "Go as far as you need to go, and no farther. Find those who are almost asleep and need a small light they cannot name." He sealed the recess with a brick the color of dawn cloud and drew upon it, with the last of his ink, the faintest mark of a spiral within a circle. It is said that on certain nights, when the moon is a bowl full of silver and the sea remembers to be gentle, a traveler who has lost their way and wanders into the old monastery will pause at a window where the snow leans in to read. They will feel, upon their cheek, the soft touch of language not yet written, and they will know without knowing how that somewhere close by, in the small hours when the world loosens its grip, there are words that appear only long enough to bless and then let go. They will sleep well for the first time in a season of hard weather. They will wake with a line in their mind that holds them like a warm palm. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps the pages in the wall are empty now. Perhaps the ink chose to walk into the night and become tide, become breath, become the thin blue that edges clouds at the hour before dawn. Or perhaps, under a certain light, they are still there, lifting and dimming like a shore. We are not asked to prove it. We are asked only to remember that secrecy is sometimes the gentlest way the sacred knows to survive. That what is most needed often travels veiled. That a scholar once wrote in disappearing ink so that his words could learn the art of arriving without startling the sleep they were meant to soften. If you stand in the corridor at midnight and place your palm against the stone where the recess rests, the cold will confess a small warmth, as if a field mouse had made a nest within. You may think you hear a reed pause, then move. You may feel a page turn from within the wall. Or you may hear nothing at all, and still leave with the sense that your name has been spoken somewhere deep, where memory meets ocean and the echo is kind. And when you step out beneath the winter sky, the moon laying a thin ladder upon the water, you may find that a sentence you did not know you needed is waiting in your breath, marked by the moon, ready to vanish and yet remain, the way tide lines linger on sand long after the wave has returned to the sacred dark. It is said there is a place where spring comes too gently, where wheat rises in a hush and poppies open as if shy of their own color, and under that soft green ocean lies a library that never learned how to burn. The elders point toward the fields and lift a finger to their lips as though to quiet the earth itself. They say the ground there has a memory, that it breathes beneath the plow and sighs when rain crosses it slantwise, that in certain light the rows ripple like parchment being turned by an invisible hand. No walls remain, no doors, no stones set upon stones, and yet the air remembers the geometry. The larks know where the aisles once ran. The wind takes a careful step. Whispers tell us the library sank not from flood or fire, but from a decision made in a season when knowledge was counted like coins and truth could be owned. Some say officials came with seals and red wax, with words dressed in iron, and declared that what was kept must be cleansed. Others say the keepers lowered their eyes and agreed to nothing, only listened to the decree pass through them like weather, and waited for the hour when the earth, more merciful than kings, would open a gate. In the night, torches moving like slow constellations along the ridge, the librarians and their quiet companions carried armfuls of breath-thin books and bundles of loose leaves and small boxes of black dust that glittered like midnight, and led them to a mouth in the ground known only to those who tended roots. The fields received them without question. Soil closed over shelves, over the spiral within the circle carved on the end of a beam, over a bell the size of a fist meant to call the lost back from their wandering. In the morning, nothing remained but the dew. Beneath the silence, the library waits in a temperate night, not sleeping, not awake, a dream that the earth decided to keep. Stacks of cedar curl to the shape of the books they once cradled. Vellum rests like folded wings. A ladder leans its forehead against a beam and does not mind the patience required. There is no flame there, only the slow mineral breath of time and the oceanic pressure of soil remembering rain. A reader who never arrived left a shawl on a chair. The shawl keeps the shape of shoulders long gone, as if the thread, too, had learned the discipline of care. Spiders wrote a short script across a doorway and then, respectful, stopped. Even the worms take the long way around certain corners, as if to honor the treaties made in the dark. It is said that when the moon lifts itself from the horizon like a silver loaf, a pale vapor rises from the fields and makes a low cloud that does not move. Children call it ghost breath. The old men call it remembrance. If you stand at the edge of the wheat with your head bowed and your hands quiet, you may hear a soft togetherness beneath your feet. Not voices, not pages, but the sound of gathered meaning remaining gathered. Cattle will not graze there. They graze around it in a wide crescent, leaving a meadow that keeps its own counsel and grows wildflowers with petals thin as eyelids. The shepherds mark it with 3 stones and a twig, an alphabet the land once taught them and they have never forgotten. There was a keeper whose name survives in the red thread of a story passed mouth to mouth along winter tables. Some call her Amy, others and of the meadow, a woman who knew the calm grammar of seed and the fiercer grammar of silence. During those narrow years when soldiers made maps with their boots and the parish bell learned to hold its tongue, she walked the fields at dusk and laid her palm upon the earth as one comforts a child difficult to wake. She dropped a single poppy seed at the place where the first stair once began. In spring a crimson eye opened there, and she knelt to thank it for remembering. It is said she kept a key in her pocket shaped like a leaf, a key that opened nothing in any visible wall. When the nights came that showed people their own breath, she would stand in the center of the meadow and lift that key to the moon and turn her wrist very slowly, and down below something would loosen, a hinge in the dark answering the old pact. If we speak of what the library held, we must move softly, as one crosses a room where someone sleeps lightly after a long illness. There were manuscripts that knew the names of stars before those names were forbidden, and diagrams that taught how to place a bell where land can hear and remember to be kind, and histories in which the victors were made to sit down and listen to the grief of those who had been erased. There was a treatise written in a hand that seemed to have learned its letters from rivers, on the subject of how a city's heart can be kept if its buildings must be let go. There were recipes for inks that preferred the night. There was a small stack of folded maps, drawn in silver chalk, that showed not roads but chords, the routes by which song finds those who need it most. There were letters from mothers to the future, beginning, when the wheat has your grandfather's color and the moon is a bowl held low. There was a book with only one sentence written 10,000 times in 1,000 hands. A sentence no one could read except by closing their eyes and letting it sound. Lux non moritur. Not everything sacred is beautiful. Some pages were smudged with fear. Some margins had the ash-gray shadow of second thoughts. A few volumes warned of the very harm that might be caused by those who loved knowledge too much, who would hoard it, polish it, make a mirror of it and forget to turn it toward the fields. The library knew its own shadow, kept the warnings close to the door. The contradiction that made those years ache still presses against the ribs of the stories. The decree that knowledge should be cleansed, and the truth that cleansing, when demanded by power, often means erasure. The claim that light must be centralized, and the answer from the earth that light diffuses, lives low, lives in seed and root and breath. The keepers did not argue. They fed their guests, mended their sleeves with thread spun from the quietest hour, and when the house grew too loud, they went into the dark and folded their books into the soil. They did not do this to hide. They did this to keep promise with the oldest covenant, that what is needed should live where it can outlast the weather of men. In late summer, when grain bends like a congregation bowing, farmers speak of a coolness that runs through the wheat like a river finger. The sick stand there and feel their fever, listen and step back. Lovers stand there and say nothing, because they have learned the dignity of not explaining a warmth. The parish children build a ring of small towers from stubble and sit inside it, pretending to read. If one of them begins to recite the alphabet backward like a charm, the others hush him, because even games require gentleness at the edge of a blessing. A century after the sinking, a scholar arrived with clean boots and hungry eyes. He had heard the whispers and wanted an answer he could fold into a book bound in leather and sold to men who do not sleep. He walked the fields with a brass rod, listening for a change in tone. He tapped, and the ground answered as ground does, with unhurried patience. He lodged at the inn and wrote in a journal whose margins were full of small arguments with those who had come before him. The third night he dreamed of a spiral within a circle drawn upon his palm with ash. He woke and rinsed it away and was ashamed of the tenderness he felt about the rinsing. On the fourth day he saw the meadow and understood nothing, which is the beginning of understanding. He took off his boots and placed his feet upon the soil and felt, rising through him, a calm the language of his trade had never needed. He wrote a letter to no one and buried it there, an apology, a promise to learn one word of the field's dialect each year until he died. Years later, a storm tore the ridge and made a long raw mouth in the earth, and for a single week the library returned to light. The villagers formed a line without speaking. They passed pages from hand to hand, not to save them from weather, but to read them in the note of day that would not damage what lived in night. The pages did not pale. They shone like the belly of a fish turned to the sun. Amy's granddaughter, now an old woman who braided her hair as if tying rope for a boat no one would board, lifted a book that weighed almost nothing and felt with her thumb the slight rise of letters that spoke of watered gardens in the desert of grief. She did not read. She listened. Then the rain came, patient and full. They returned the books to their shelves as one returns the body of a friend to a bed that has kept their shape for years. The earth closed its mouth. The meadow bloomed wildly the next spring. If you are wondering whether the library is real, you already know the answer. Reality is not a fence. It is a field that allows certain kinds of walking. There is a proof that does not bruise the thing it tests. There is evidence that chooses the heart as its archive because the heart remembers the pressure of a book more faithfully than the eye counts pages. Walk there at dusk. Carry nothing metal. When the swallows write their brief poems above you and the light lies down upon the barley as if it were tired and wished to be held, kneel and place your ear to the ground. You may hear only your own breath arranged by soil, and that will be enough. Or you may hear the long vowel of a song learning its way beneath the earth, a vowel that contains a door, and the door a table, and the table a bowl the size of your palm, and in the bowl a key shaped like a leaf, and beside the key a note that says simply, when you are ready. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps this is why the library chose to sink rather than be seen too soon. It wanted to avoid the bright noise that was coming. It wanted to go on feeding the underlanguage that roots use to speak with rain, that mothers use when their children sleep and the house must learn again how to be a harbor. It wanted to remain oceanic and veiled and sure, not hoarded, not hidden, but placed where the world could not mistake it for anything but what it was. A trust. At harvest, when scythes move like silver swans' necks and the air is full of chaff that looks, from a distance, like starlight fallen to earth, the people make a small circle where the meadow rests and leave a bowl of milk and a book of blank pages and a sprig of rosemary. The bowl is empty by morning, though no animal's mouth could have found it. The book is always one page heavier. If you lift that page to the light, it shows nothing. If you lift it to the moon, it shows a single line that fades as you read. Where memory fades, the field remembers. You will not be able to keep that page. You will not need to. It will sit behind your breastbone like a small warm stone and help you cross certain nights. We do not know if the library will ever return. Perhaps it rises one night each century to breathe and to count its unseen readers by the way the wildflowers lean. Perhaps it hums to the worms a lullaby that reminds them to leave the thin covers intact. Perhaps the bell the size of a fist, buried with the first shelves, still rings when history trembles, and the sound runs up the roots into the wheat, and the wheat whispers against itself in a language that farmers call wind. Or perhaps nothing of this is needed, because the library has finished its work, because the words it kept walked into the world one by one, barefoot and fearless, and found who they were meant to bless. It is enough to stand at the edge of that meadow and let the silence place its hand upon your shoulder. It is enough to call that hand history, or mercy, or the patience of the ground. It is enough to feel that somewhere beneath you lies a room made of listening, and on its table a lamp that does not choose between day and night, and beside the lamp a book that is your breath arranged into lines tender enough to be read by seed. It is enough to leave without proof, carrying only the way your own pace slowed, the way your ribs widened, the way you forgot your name for a minute and did not panic, because the field remembered it for you. When you turn back toward the village, the dusk will have learned your weight. You will pass 3 stones and a twig and understand why they are a sentence. You will walk through the sound of crickets like beads sliding in a bowl. You will keep one hand open until you reach your door, and if anyone asks why, you will say that sometimes the earth gives a key to whoever is gentle enough to carry it. You will not show them. You will hang it on a hook no one sees. And when the next hard season comes and the bright noise begins again, you will know where to stand, and how to kneel, and what to say into the soil so that a quiet library can do what libraries do best. Remain, veiled and sacred, beneath the fields, holding the breath of what we cannot yet bear to forget. It is said there was a year when the sky forgot its own reflection. A year when shepherds lifted their eyes and found only darkness staring back. No constellations, no guides, no memory of light. In the chronicles of monks who wrote by candle and fear, it is called Annus Tenebris, the year of shadow. And though centuries have passed, there are still those who believe the heavens once closed their eyes. Not in anger, but in mourning. The story begins in a valley where the mountains hold their breath. It was winter, and the world seemed paused between heartbeats. The air was crisp with frost, the rivers glassed over, the fields sleeping beneath a quilt of silver. Yet something in the air had shifted, a stillness too complete, as though the wind itself had wandered off and forgotten to return. Farmers spoke in whispers. The animals grew restless at dusk, turning their faces toward the sky as if listening for a note that would not come. Then, one evening, the stars went out. There was no explosion, no thunder, no eclipse to mark the moment. They simply dimmed. First one, then a handful, then all, folding themselves into a darkness so deep that even the moon seemed unsure where to place its reflection. The world did not end that night, but it changed its rhythm. Sleep became heavier. Candles burned lower, as if reluctant to take the stars' place. The horizon forgot its edges, and every traveler lost the map within their own bones. Some said it was punishment, that humankind had grown too curious, charting the heavens like thieves counting treasure. Others believed the stars had simply grown tired of being watched, tired of being named. The scholars argued, the priests prayed, and the children dreamed of the sky returning like a parent lost in a storm. But the heavens remained blind. In the monasteries, the monks continued to record each night in their journals. The script grew smaller with each entry, as though shrinking from the emptiness it described. The firmament has withdrawn, one wrote, and we are left beneath a ceiling without memory. Yet among those same records, there is mention of a hermit, a woman who lived beyond the mountains, where the air thinned into spirit and silence. She was called Mara of the North Wind, and it is said she did not fear the darkness. When others fled the valleys seeking light, she climbed higher, carrying only a staff and a bowl of oil. She had been a keeper of the old sky lore, the songs that told how each constellation was born, how each star carried a word too sacred to speak. And she believed the stars had not vanished, but withdrawn, like birds seeking a safer horizon. She believed they waited to be called back. Mara climbed until the air tasted of iron and the snow turned blue beneath her feet. On the third night, She reached a plateau where the wind hummed low, like breath caught between words. There she set her bowl of oil upon a flat stone and lit it with a single spark drawn from the friction of 2 frozen twigs. The flame rose reluctantly, small and trembling. Around it, the world remained vast and blind. Then she began to sing. It was not a song of language, but of tone, the old chant of remembering, taught by those who once watched the skies with devotion rather than curiosity. Her voice was thin at first, cracked by the cold, but it carried. Down through the valleys it drifted, over sleeping villages and quiet rivers, through forests that leaned in to listen. She sang until dawn. When her breath failed, she slept beside the dying flame, her hand curled around the bowl as though cradling a heartbeat. At the same hour, in the monastery miles below, a novice keeping night watch saw something strange. The faintest shimmer above the mountain peaks, like dust caught in moonlight. He rubbed his eyes, certain he imagined it. But when he looked again, there it was, a single point of light where before there had been none. The monks recorded it that morning. Una stella, Renata, 1 star, reborn. Mara did not descend. She stayed upon the mountain for 40 nights. Her flame rekindled each dusk, her song softening the edges of the world. And one by one the stars returned. Slowly, shyly, like memories finding their way back through fog. They appeared in unfamiliar patterns at first, new shapes drawn from the ruins of the old, constellations without names, scattered across the heavens as if uncertain where they belonged. The people below watched in awe. Children pointed with open mouths. Scholars wept over their instruments. The priests rang bells long silent. Yet the sky was not the same. The old constellations, the hunter, the lion, the scales, had not returned as they were. Their stars had drifted, rearranged, rewritten themselves into new stories. And those who had memorized the heavens before the long night found their knowledge useless. The universe had begun again, and the language of light had changed. The world adapted slowly. Navigators followed the rivers instead of the horizon. Poets rewrote their verses to fit new constellations. Even the monks, those steadfast keepers of pattern and order, learned to leave space in their records, gaps for what could no longer be charted. But the people remembered Mara. They built a small chapel at the foot of her mountain, though her body was never found. Inside it they placed a single lamp that burned with oil drawn from the same seed she carried. A pale, cold light, said to flicker whenever the sky trembled. They called it Lumen Vocis, the light of the voice. Pilgrims still climb there when nights grow heavy, leaving offerings of silence rather than prayer. Some scholars in later centuries claimed the missing stars were nothing but a veil of dust passing between earth and heaven, an accident of light and distance. But others, those who listened rather than measured, insisted it was something deeper. They said the stars had turned inward, as though the universe itself were meditating, closing its eyes to recall its own origin. Even now, astronomers speak of dark intervals, small regions of the cosmos where light bends and disappears. They map them with precision, giving them coordinates and names. But the old ones, those who remember the tale of Mara, know better. They say those dark intervals are the echoes of that ancient silence, where the stars once hid, listening for a voice patient enough to call them home. Sometimes, on the rarest of nights, the sky grows unusually still, the air heavy, the stars faint, as though the world holds its breath again. Those who have inherited the old songs hum softly then, without knowing why. They hum in kitchens and deserts, at windows and shorelines, and the air listens. A light flickers at the edge of sight. The rhythm of remembering stirs. Perhaps that is all the sky ever needed. Not worship, not names, not charts or prayers, but a single voice lifted gently into the dark. A sound that reminds the stars they are not alone. It is said that when Mara's flame finally died, the last of its smoke rose into the sky and became the faint band of light we now call the Milky Way. A scar or a bridge, depending on how you look. In its pale curve, the heavens hold the story of absence turned to return, of silence learning to shine again. So when you find yourself beneath the night and the stars seem fewer than they should be, step outside. Let your eyes adjust to the dark until you can almost hear the pulse of your own blood, the tide of your breath. Then hum, quietly, a sound that does not ask but remembers. The sky, it is said, still listens for that tone. For though the stars have returned, they have never forgotten the year they vanished, the year the earth learned to sing. And perhaps that is what they wait for still. The echo of a single voice, small but steady, rising from the valley where memory meets light, reminding the universe that even in the darkest night, someone still remembers the way home. It is said there was once a monastery where the night arrived early, as if the hill itself preferred the company of darkness. The brothers there learned to walk by memory, to place their hands along the stone at the same places each dusk, to let the oceanic hush of the wind be their lantern. In that monastery lived a monk whose name, if written at all, has crumbled into dust at the bottom of the archives. Whispers tell us he was small and careful, with a face that looked always a little surprised by kindness. He tended the lamps and polished the brass with a patience that seemed borrowed from another century. When others slept, he moved through the cloister with a flame cupped in his palm, and the shadows followed him like animals that had agreed to be gentle. Beneath the silence of those hours, the shadows learned his breath. They lengthened when he paused, folded when he bowed, gathered in the angles where two walls remembered each other. He began, without deciding to begin, to greet them, not aloud, not with words, but with that soft acknowledgement one grants to a familiar bird at the sill or to the thin cat that finds the sunny square on the floor. It is said that on a winter night when snow marked the window with stardust and the bell rope was stiff with cold, he saw, as clearly as a script, the outline of a hand appear upon the wall beside his own. It was not his hand. It did not mimic his movement. It lifted, then rested, then lifted again, as if testing the weight of being seen. He did not tell the brothers. He placed the lamp upon the flagstone and sat, and the shadows settled like a cloak across his knees. He waited until the wick sighed into a smaller light, and then he whispered, almost to the dust, "If you are not hunger or harm, you may stay." After that, the shadows returned each night. Sometimes they seemed to arrive from beneath the doors, thin and river-like, as if the floor had learned a new current. Sometimes they blossomed from the corners, dark flowers opening toward him. They did not speak in a way that could be set down on a page. They moved. They arranged themselves into quiet parables. A small arch becoming a doorway, a bell mouth widening and then narrowing, a spiral within a circle spinning so slowly, he would not have noticed had his breath been less steady. Once, along the south wall where the lime wash still held the faint memory of vines, a procession of figures passed, long-limbed, veiled, carrying bowls. He lifted the lamp to see their faces, and at once they vanished, as if light had been too sudden a touch. He lowered the lamp and apologized, and one figure returned, head inclined, as if to say that apology had been understood. In the scriptorium the next day, he copied a psalm and in the margin made a mark that was not a letter. A short, curved line like the mouth of a sleeping child. It had no meaning in any alphabet preserved by the house. Yet when he looked at it again while the ink was drying, he felt a warmth move up his arm and settle beneath his collarbone. The senior scribe frowned, then softened, then said nothing. The page went to binding. The mark stayed, star-marked by accident where a fleck of gold leaf had drifted. There were strict rules about images. The abbey had weathered a century in which pictures were forbidden, and the walls still remembered the stern hands that scraped saints into gray anonymity. Yet, at night, when the lamps were lowered and the winter's breath moved through the choir like a slow tide, small drawings began to appear in the manuscripts. Not saints, not angels, not the familiar ladder of piety, but animals shaped by darkness. Deer whose antlers held a crescent moon, fish made of braided lines, a moth as large as a palm with eyes upon its wings. In the corner of one gospel, where a scribe might leave a harmless leaf or a curling vine, a figure sat with its knees drawn up, forehead in hand, patient as stone. The brothers who turned these pages later swore they had never made such marks. The ink, when examined by more modern hands, seemed part soot, part shadow, a night-born pigment that refused to be weighed. The monk did not claim any of it. He simply kept the lamps trimmed, measured oil into the little cups, and learned. This was the true work, to place the light so the shadows could live. If the flame stood too near the wall, the shadows fled into a thin fear that made the room look starved. If he set it too far, the dark pooled heavily, unkind to old knees and uncertain steps. Between the two, there was a veiled balance, a sweetness of angle and height, a candled science not written in any manual. How to let what is hidden keep enough shape to be companionable. He practiced until his hands knew without asking, and the corridors held their gentle creatures. In the seed hush of those nights, questions arrived like snowflakes, small and distinct and vanishing upon the sleeve. What do shadows remember that light forgets? From what buried place does their tenderness rise? Are they the absence of sight, or the presence of another way of seeing? He held the questions like seeds held in a winter palm, not to be argued, only warmed. The brothers began to notice that their sleep was different. Dreams grew steadier, less fevered. When fear came, it arrived as a visitor who knocked first and waited to be invited. A novice with a history of waking at the same hour, heart galloping, found that the hour came and went while he slept deep as loam. An old brother with poor sight, who had long been afraid of the cloister at dusk, discovered he could walk by the monks' lamps with a courage that did not need a name. At none, when the sun leaned and the chapel smelled of wood and wool, a rumor passed among them that the monastery's shadows had learned to pray. There were questions from the outside too. A bishop visited, stiff in his traveling cloak, and gazed at the walls with that expression of proprietorship common among men who believe their ring gives them the key to every door. He lifted a lamp from its place and held it high, triumphant, as if to prove light's dominion. The lamp sputtered and went out. The monk stepped forward, bowed, and relit it with a coal taken from a dish he had warmed beneath his robe. The bishop coughed, said something about drafts, and left sooner than planned, carrying, despite himself, a small quiet through the gate. What did the shadows say? If say is the right word for a conversation without words. They taught him timings. They taught him to move the lamp a finger's width to disclose a threshold. They taught him to lower the light when the sick approached, because harshness is not medicine. They taught him how to hold his own sorrow so it would not spill into the room and frighten children. On the night his brother died, in a town far away with no letter to carry the news, the shadows became the shape of the two boys they had once been, running along a river. He understood and sat on the floor and let his grief be a river too. The next morning the post rider brought what the night had already given. He touched the seal, did not break it, placed it beneath a stone on the windowsill, and went to polish the brass with a cloth that had belonged to his mother. The drawings in the margins multiplied. Sometimes they seemed playful. A hair peering from behind a capital letter, a boat folded from a single line moving across the line of a psalm. Sometimes they carried a weight the brothers felt in their ribs, a hand descending into a well of ink and rising with nothing, a pair of eyes closed but seeing, a spiral within a circle tucked where only the patient could find it. Scholars centuries later would argue about the authorship, the tradition, the secret school. The brothers living under that roof didn't argue. They turned the pages and, at certain places, let their thumbs rest a moment in gratitude that had no recipient. Winter loosened. The hill remembered green. The monk carried his lamps to the courtyard and cleaned them in the sun. He held each glass up and watched the day refract into small rainbows along his sleeve. The shadows, now shy in the early light, stayed close to the arcades. He nodded to them as one nods to neighbors at a garden fence. He rarely entered the city, but once he went to fetch a coil of wick and returned before Compline with a small parcel of black thread sold to him by a woman who dabbed tears with the corner of her shawl while insisting she wasn't crying. He chose the thread not for its strength, but because it reminded him of the lines shadows make when they decide to draw. There were dangers. A young brother grew enamored of the game of making shapes upon the walls and began to gesture wildly with the lamp, scattering darkness into sharp angles that frightened the novices. The monk took the lamp from him, set it upon the floor, and sat until the room forgot the insult. He said nothing harsh. He told the boy later, in the garden, that our hands are strong enough to lift only the gentler mysteries, and that too much eagerness can bruise what is trying to arrive. In a spring storm, lightning struck the bell tower and the night filled with the smell of scorched oak. Rain came as if the sky had been waiting for permission. The brothers ran with buckets. The monk ran with lamps, moving them to the chapel so the shadows would not be trampled by panic. Water found its way through stone and sang along the aisles. When they at last sat, soaked and panting, a shadow in the shape of a bent harp lay across the floor. The monk traced its curve with one finger. The next week he fashioned a small harp from willow and strung it with that black thread. It made a sound like breath becoming a note. He hung it where wind could find it. At matins, an added tone washed the room with a sweetness so thin the brothers at first thought they had imagined it. Then they learned to lean toward it the way one leans toward a remembered name. Stories require a miracle, and perhaps this is the one they choose. On a night marked by the moon and a wind that smelt of turned soil, the monk forgot to bring his lamp. He smiled at the error and continued along the corridor, trusting the way his feet had memorized the earth. In the chapter house, the darkness was whole and kind. He sat on the bench and folded his hands and waited for the shadows to arrive. They did. They came from the threshold, gathered along the table, pooled like ink and then rose like mist. In their rising, he saw profiles not quite human in eyes he recognized from carvings older than the chapel itself. He felt neither fear nor triumph. He felt welcome in his own house. A single firefly drifted through the high window and wrote a brief letter in the air. He answered with his breath. He lived long, or perhaps he lived brief and bright. The chronicles, what remain of them, do not agree. When he became the kind of tired that does not ask for permission, he arranged his lamps along the corridor in a way that pleased him and sat and set the flame before him and watched it lean and bow and stand again, as if saying grace. The shadows arranged themselves beside him, not quite in the shape of wings. He closed his eyes and felt the gentle weight of something placed upon his chest, as light as a page. The breath left him as a candle leaves the room when the window opens. Afterward, the lamps still burned, but they were never again placed so perfectly. The shadows continued to visit, but only when no one tried to coax them. The drawings in the margins slowed and then ceased, as if the hand that taught the pen to listen had been called elsewhere. The harp sang less often, yet the house had learned. The brothers, without deciding it together, lowered their voices at dusk. They walked more softly, placed their palms against stone with a tenderness that needed no justification. And when fear arrived, which it always does, they set the lamps so the fear could see its own shape and become smaller. Centuries later, restorers scraped a wall and found beneath the lime a faded fresco. A figure seated on a low stool, a lamp at his feet, a pattern of dark and light about him like a veil that had learned to breathe. In the margin of a single surviving codex, someone discovered, barely visible, a sentence written backward, as if meant to be read by a mirror. Where memory fades, what is hidden speaks. The ink was strange, neither carbon nor gall, but a compound that tasted, to the chemist's tongue of curiosity, like ash and rain. In another book, a smudge at the corner proved, under patient light, to be a spiral within a circle, drawn as if by a fingertip dipped in dusk. If you go there now, the monastery stands with its clean-boned dignity, its stone marked by centuries of hands. The lamps are new, trimmed by caretakers who follow a schedule and a chart on the sacristy door. But in certain months, when the sun steps away early and the fields smell of straw and old light, the corridors remember. In those hours, if you walk with your own breath slowed and your shoulders free of haste, you may see a gentle rearranging at the edge of your sight. A doorway where there is none, a cup placed upon a table no one has set, a moth the size of your palm hovering where no candle burns. Do not raise your light. Do not even turn your head. Stand in that oceanic hush and let the shadows speak their soft, unlettered blessing. Perhaps they are not messengers at all. Perhaps they are the places where the world practices being tender with itself. Perhaps the monk did nothing but listen, and listening made a room where even darkness could be kind. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. If this is one of them, take the echo with you, marked by the moon and carried low like a lamp under your cloak. Use it to set down your own fear without proof. Use it to let the hidden keep its shape. And when you pass a wall and see your shadow lift its hand, lift yours a little too, and rest it there, palm to palm on the cool stone. Long enough to learn what the night has always tried to say. That light survives by giving darkness a place to rest, and that, beneath the silence, even what is unseen can hold us, veiled and sacred, until morning finds our names again. It is said that the floor of St. Eramund's Abbey was never truly still. When the monks walked across it at dawn, they sometimes heard a faint sound beneath the stones. Not echo, not emptiness, but something like a heartbeat muffled by centuries of prayer. Visitors assumed it was the earth settling, or water moving far below, yet the brothers knew better. They had long been taught that the abbey was built upon an older foundation, one that breathed when the wind fell quiet. Beneath their feet lay a secret that even the abbot refused to name aloud. The hidden gate. No one living knew when it had been sealed. Some claimed it had been closed by the first builders to protect the faithful from a pagan chamber below, where the last priests of forgotten gods once sang to the moon. Others said it was a burial vault, consecrated to saints who asked to sleep beneath the altar, closer to the bones of the world. But the oldest story, the one whispered only in winter, said that the gate did not lead downward at all. It opened sideways, into a place that shared the air of this world but not its time. The entrance lay directly under the nave. The flagstones there were worn smooth by generations of footsteps, by knees pressed in prayer, by the soft drag of robes. Nothing marked it, no seam, no symbol, no difference of color. Only at certain hours, when the light from the eastern window fell across the floor at a slant, could a watchful eye catch the shimmer of a circle no wider than a man's arm span, engraved so shallowly it looked more like a ripple than a carving. At its center, barely visible even under candlelight, was the old sign. A spiral within a circle, the mark that wandered through so many of the abbey's mysteries like a breath remembered from another life. Brother Elias was the first to notice the shimmer. He was a quiet man, responsible for cleaning the nave at dawn, before the others stirred. His broom swept in measured arcs, and the sound of straw against stone had become its own kind of prayer. One morning, as the sun began to climb, his broom paused at the center of the floor. The light that spilled through the glass above had turned the stones into pale water. Beneath that shimmer he saw it, the faint spiraling mark. He knelt, brushed the dust away, and felt the cool outline beneath his fingertips. That night, he dreamed of the same floor, but the stone beneath him was warm, almost alive. He heard a sound, deep, patient, like wind turning through caverns, and he knew it was the sound he had mistaken all his life for silence. When he woke, his pulse was steady, yet his hands trembled. Elias told no one. Instead, he began to listen. He would linger after prayers, kneeling in the same place long after the others had left. At first there was nothing, only the small sounds of the abbey breathing, the wood settling, the drip of water in the cloister, the echo of distant birds. But gradually something began to change. There were intervals, soft intervals between heartbeats, where the air grew dense, as if filled with a music just beyond hearing. He would bow his head lower, pressing his ear to the cold stone. Sometimes, in that stillness, he thought he heard whispers rising through the floor. Not words, but the suggestion of words, the shape of language made of wind and patience. One evening, as the candles were being extinguished, Elias felt the ground give a single sigh beneath him. The stone shifted no more than a breath, but he felt it move. He placed his palm upon it and felt warmth, faint but sure. Beneath the centuries, something stirred. He began to study the abbey's records in secret. In a cupboard of the scriptorium, he found a fragment of an older ledger written in Latin so faded it seemed to come from another light. It spoke of a door sealed by the faithful, marked with the sign of circles, and of voices kept in the ground until the appointed year. The ink had bled into the vellum, the words half-eaten by damp, yet the phrase porta sub altar remained clear. The gate beneath the altar. Elias traced the letters with a reverent finger, and the room seemed to grow colder. After that night, his dreams became longer. He saw corridors of blue stone, lit by lamps that burned without flame. He saw shelves carved into rock, holding not books but small bells, hundreds of them, each one trembling as if caught in a sound too low to hear. He saw the same spiral carved into the walls, glowing faintly, like the memory of light. And always, at the end of the dream, there was a door. It had no handle, only a hollow where a hand might rest, as if to ask permission before entering. The more Elias listened, the more he began to understand the rhythm beneath the abbey's silence. The brothers prayed in measured tones, rising and falling, never realizing that their chants echoed the hidden pulse below. The abbey itself was an instrument, built to keep the gate sleeping. The harmony of their prayers was its lullaby. One winter night, when the wind pressed against the shutters like a hand, Elias returned to the nave with a single candle. The abbey was empty. Even the mice were quiet. He set the candle at the center of the spiral. His flame bent toward the floor. Slowly, the lines beneath his knees began to glow. Faint at first, then brighter, forming a circle of soft gold light that pulsed like a living thing. The air thickened, the candle guttered, and then, for the first time, the gate opened. Not outward, not downward, but inward, like the drawing of a breath. The stone dissolved into shadow. Beneath it, a stairway descended into darkness, spiraling toward the earth. Elias hesitated only a moment before stepping through. The air below was cool and dry, smelling of old dust and salt. The walls glimmered faintly, as if the stone itself remembered moonlight. As he descended, the sound of the abbey above faded until all that remained was the slow rhythm of his heartbeat. Then he heard something else, a hum, low and steady, like a distant choir holding a single note. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. The stairway ended in a vast chamber. Elias stood at its threshold, his candle barely piercing the dark. Around him rose pillars carved with patterns of stars and spirals, their edges worn smooth by centuries. In the center of the chamber stood a great circular door of bronze, sealed and silent. Upon it, in the same looping script he had seen in his dreams, was written a single phrase: Lux custodit somnia terrae. The light guards the dreams of the earth. Elias approached and laid his hand upon the door. It was warm. The hum grew louder, resolving into the faintest echo of voices. Not singing, but breathing, the breath of thousands sleeping beneath the world. He withdrew his hand, trembling. For the first time he understood. This was no prison. It was a vault of remembrance, a sanctuary for everything the world had chosen to forget. Knowledge too dangerous to be destroyed, prayers too vast to be spoken aloud, grief too deep to name, all laid to rest here, guarded by silence. He knelt, head bowed, and whispered the only prayer that came: Let what sleeps stay gentle. The light on the door flickered once, as if acknowledging him. Then the hum began to fade. The warmth retreated. The stairway behind him brightened, calling him back. He turned once more to the door, and in that final moment before the light disappeared, he thought he saw a shape reflected upon its surface. His own shadow, but larger, older, and smiling. When Elias emerged into the nave, dawn was breaking. The circle of light had dimmed, the stone cool beneath his palms once more. The candle at his side had burned to its base. He stood, his knees aching, his breath slow, and looked around the empty hall. It was as it had always been, still, gray, unassuming. Yet something in the air had changed. The silence now carried a depth, a tenderness, as if the abbey had drawn a long breath and exhaled peace. He never spoke of what he saw, but those who prayed beside him in the days that followed said his voice carried a new weight, quiet, but filled with something unnameable, as though each word had been lit from within. The children who visited the abbey said that when Brother Elias passed, the dust motes in the sunlight seemed to follow him, swirling like tiny stars. Years later, after his death, when restorers repaired the cracked floor of the nave, they found beneath one of the stones a small inscription, carved in a hand so delicate it might have been written by light itself. It read, "The gate is not gone. It listens." They left it unrecorded, as per the abbey's tradition. But the masons who replaced the stone did so carefully, pressing their palms to it before setting it back, as if sealing a wound with gratitude. Now, when the wind moves through the abbey at night, it seems to rise from beneath the floor, humming softly in the same pitch as the monks' old prayers. Visitors feel it under their shoes, a pulse that has nothing to do with the heart. And some nights, when the moonlight finds its way through the stained glass and lands upon the center of the nave, the faint shimmer of a spiral appears once more, just long enough for those who still believe in hidden things to kneel, to listen, and to remember that not every door is meant to open outward. Some open only within. For the earth, too, keeps its secrets. And beneath the silence, the gate still dreams. It is said that the fall of Rome did not sound like thunder. It sounded like paper, the slow tearing of maps, the quiet collapse of libraries, the sigh of stone returning to dust. No trumpet announced it, no single night claimed the ending. The empire simply exhaled one last time and forgot to draw another breath. What remained was not ruin, but silence. A silence that spread like mist across the lands that had once been written in gold on the emperor's charts. In the centuries that followed, that silence became the air itself. Roads vanished beneath grass, aqueducts broke like ribs across the countryside, and cities turned inward, dreaming their own names. Yet the silence was not empty. It carried the faint pulse of memory, like a shell still echoing the tide long after the sea has gone. Those who walked the old roads could still hear it. A hum beneath their feet, a low note that seemed to remember voices even after they were gone. They called it the Dark Age, but darkness was not what fell upon the world. It was listening that fell. A great listening that gathered over fields and monasteries and ruined baths, waiting for something to speak again. In those years, the world was made of fragments. A monk in Ireland copied a single line from a Roman philosopher and felt as though he were carrying fire cupped in both hands. A weaver in Gaul used pieces of broken mosaic to decorate her loom. A farmer in Hispania built his house from the remains of a temple, not knowing that the stones he lifted once held prayers to forgotten gods. Every gesture was an act of preservation, though no one called it that. They were simply trying to live, to build warmth out of what had been left behind. Among them was a woman named Saren, a name meaning quiet. She lived in a small village that grew where an imperial road met the edge of a forest. The road was still visible in the ground, a ribbon of old stone running beneath the soil like a buried vein. Saren was the daughter of a stonemason who died rebuilding the same wall 3 times, each time a little smaller. Her mother sang songs with no beginning and no end, songs in a language that had already forgotten its own alphabet. Saren grew up listening to those songs and to the silence that followed them, the long spaces between words where something larger seemed to breathe. When she was 12, she began to wander the edges of the ruins, the remnants of a villa long surrendered to ivy. In the courtyard lay a fountain without water, its basin cracked but still catching rain. At its center stood a statue of a woman whose face had melted away, though her hands still lifted as if to offer something unseen. Saren would sit beside that statue and listen to the wind moving through the empty arches. Sometimes, she thought she could hear whispers rising from the ground, faint, broken syllables like prayers half remembered. As she grew older, Saren began to carve. She used shards of fallen marble to shape smaller stones, smoothing them until they held the quiet weight of thought. Her neighbors called her strange, a girl who spoke more to wind than to people, but they kept her carvings on their doorways all the same. They said her hands brought luck, that her stones kept sickness away. In truth, Saren carved not to ward off death, but to remember the shape of stillness. One winter, a band of travelers arrived from the east, pilgrims, they said, though their robes were torn and their sandals worn to threads. They carried no relics, only a small chest wrapped in cloth. They asked for shelter, and the villagers, remembering the famine years, hesitated. But Saren opened her door. She gave them bread and fire, and in return, the oldest of the pilgrims told her a story. He said there had been a city beyond the mountains where the last scholars of Rome gathered to keep learning alive. They carried scrolls across the crumbling empire like torches across a sea. But when the fires of conquest reached their gates, they buried what they could not save. "We placed it in the ground," he said, "and asked the earth to keep it until the world learned to listen again." That night, Saren dreamed of the buried city. In her dream, the streets were rivers of ash, yet beneath them glowed a faint light, pulsing like embers waiting to be stirred. She woke before dawn, walked to the ruins beyond her village, and placed her ear to the cold stone of the fountain. The same low hum was there, not loud, but steady, like breath beneath the surface of sleep. She began to carve again, but now her hands moved differently. Her chisels traced not faces or symbols but patterns that followed the sound she heard in the earth. Spirals within circles, lines that folded back upon themselves like waves. Each piece felt less like creation and more like translation, as though she were copying something whispered to her from below. When she was done, she placed the carvings around the fountain and waited. Days passed. Nothing changed. Then, one evening as the sun fell, she saw a faint shimmer around the basin, a light as soft as moonlit water. It spread across the stone, filling the cracks, outlining the statue's missing face until, for a heartbeat, she could see it whole. The features were gentle, ageless, neither divine nor human, simply listening. Saren dropped to her knees. The light faded as the sky darkened, but it left behind a warmth that lingered even after the wind returned. She did not speak of it, not even when the travelers left, carrying her bread and silence with them. Yet in the years that followed, those who passed through her village noticed something strange. The air there seemed thicker, slower, as if it carried the weight of a blessing. The grass grew greener near the ruins, the wells never ran dry, and during storms, lightning never struck the same hill twice. Scholars in later ages would call this superstition, but the villagers said only that Saren had taught the earth how to remember itself. When she died, old, with her hands still rough from the chisel, they buried her beside the fountain. In the centuries that followed, her name vanished from records, her stones scattered, her story reduced to a whisper told to children about the woman who spoke to the silence after Rome. But something of her work remained. Travelers who rested near those ruins claimed to hear faint voices in the night, like a distant choir rising from beneath the ground. The air would hum with the same low note, and if they slept there, they would dream of cities built not of marble but of light. When they woke, they could never recall the details, only the feeling that the world beneath them was still alive, waiting. It is said that centuries later, when archaeologists dug among the old Roman roads, they found small carved stones scattered deep in the soil, arranged in circular patterns. Their designs matched no known script. Under lamplight, the lines seemed to shift, forming new shapes as if the stone itself were remembering. And when the wind blew through the excavation at night, the sound was unmistakable. A low hum, the same tone recorded in the earliest songs of Gregorian chant, a sound that seemed to come not from the air, but from time itself. One of the workers, an old man who had lost his hearing years before, swore he could feel the vibration through his bones. "It isn't music," he said. "It's memory." Perhaps that is what the silence after Rome truly was. Not a void, but a long inhalation before a new breath. Not an ending, but a remembering too deep for words. The empire had fallen, yes. The roads were gone, the marble cracked, the statues broken. But beneath all that, a rhythm endured. The pulse of learning passed from one hand to another, of faith turning into song, of silence keeping safe what noise could not. And in that silence, seeds were planted. The first libraries of the monasteries, the songs of monks who did not know they were rebuilding the language of stars, the stories that would one day grow into the cathedrals and chronicles of a reborn world. History calls that age dark, but perhaps the darkness was a womb. Perhaps the silence was not absence but preparation. The deep, sacred stillness that comes before dawn. It is said that if you stand among the ruins of the old roads at night, when the air is thick with dew and the horizon hums faintly, you can still hear it, that low, patient note running beneath the earth. It is neither Roman nor Christian, neither past nor present. It is the sound of continuity itself, the music of things refusing to die. Close your eyes then. Place your palm against the ground. Feel the faint warmth moving beneath your hand. as if the soil remembers your name before you were born. That is the silence after Rome, not the void of loss, but the echo of endurance. The sound of memory resting, waiting to rise again when the world is ready to listen. It is said that there is a village somewhere between two forgotten borders where a bell still rings, though no one remains to pull its rope. It stands in a crooked tower beside a river that long ago changed its course, leaving the bell half buried in reeds and reflection. No priest tends it, no worshippers gather beneath its shadow, and yet, when the air turns cold or the world remembers sorrow, the bell begins to move. Its tone carries far, across valleys, across time, low and steady, like the heartbeat of a memory too patient to fade. The villagers who once lived there told a story passed through generations until the last of them carried it into silence. They said the bell was cast in a century of famine, when the fields had stopped answering prayer. The blacksmiths, desperate for warmth, melted down the iron of broken plows, the hinges of ruined gates, and the rusted chains of abandoned wells. They mixed it all with a single handful of silver taken from a chalice found buried beneath an oak tree, a relic of a faith older than the church itself. When the molten metal was poured into the mold, a storm rose over the valley. The workers fled, fearing lightning, but one stayed behind. A boy who had lost his family to hunger and believed, somehow, that the bell would carry their voices. He watched as the rain hissed against the forge and the thunder answered like a distant drum. When morning came, the storm had passed, and the bell stood cool and dark and perfect. They hung it in the tower, and when it rang for the first time, every bird in the valley took flight. The sound was not bright like other bells. It was deep, oceanic, a sound that seemed to fold space upon itself. Those who listened said they could hear layers within it. The murmur of rivers, the whisper of plows, the quiet clang of blacksmiths long gone. The old women crossed themselves and wept. The children covered their ears, afraid that the sound might reveal their dreams aloud. From that day onward, the bell rang not only for mass, but for every grief and every joy. It rang when a child was born, when a harvest began, when a storm broke, when a war ended, and when it began again. It was said that the bell could tell the difference between sorrow and celebration, that it adjusted its tone to match the heart of the village. Sometimes it was clear and silvered. Sometimes it was dark and heavy, as though the earth itself had spoken. One winter the famine returned, and with it came the soldiers of a distant king. They took the grain, the cattle, and the strong men, leaving only hunger and hollow windows. The abbot, fearing that the invaders would melt the bell for weapons, ordered it to be silenced. He climbed the tower himself and cut the rope. But the next night, as snow began to fall, the bell rang again, once, twice, 3 times. The sound rolled across the valley, and every hearth fire flared brighter. Every sleeping child turned in their dreams and smiled. The soldiers heard it too. They searched the tower, but found no one. The bell swayed gently, as if breathing. Terrified, they fled, leaving the village untouched. The next morning, the snow lay thick across the road, unmarked by hoof or wheel. Years passed. Empires rose, empires fell. The river shifted its path, and the village shrank into memory. The last monk who kept the abbey's keys died in his sleep with the bell rope wrapped around his wrist, as if to remind the world of its own rhythm. The tower crumbled, ivy climbed, and yet, even when the roof fell and the fields turned wild, travelers claimed to hear the bell. Some said it rang only at the edge of war. Others swore it tolled before great inventions, before births, before deaths, before the turning of history itself. They called it the memory bell. In the 18th century, a poet on pilgrimage claimed to have found it. He wrote that the tower was nothing but stone bones now, leaning like a tired man. The bell was cracked, but whole. When he touched it, it vibrated faintly beneath his hand, as if remembering the sound it once carried. He said the crack was not from age but from mercy, that if it rang whole, it would break the heart of the listener. He described lying in the grass beside it as dusk fell, the wind moving through the hollow of its mouth, and hearing, for a breath's length, every voice he had ever loved speaking at once. He left the valley before dawn and never returned. Centuries later, during a war that burned maps faster than men could draw them, a regiment marched through that same valley. The soldiers camped near the ruins, not knowing what stood there. That night, just before the attack, the bell rang. The sound was faint but clear, rising through smoke and rain. The men froze. The captains barked orders, but the troops did not move. Something in the tone held them still, a depth that felt older than fear, older even than loyalty. When dawn came, the fog had lifted, and the battle had not begun. Some called it a miracle, others desertion. The commanding officer said only that the valley was not ours to enter. After that, the bell disappeared from record again. Only in small villages nearby did its rumor persist. Old women heard it while washing clothes by the river. Miners heard it deep underground, faint and patient, as though the rock itself had kept an echo of its sound. Pilgrims passing through the ruins left offerings, a handful of grain, a candle stub, a coin etched with the sign of a spiral within a circle. Modern historians dismissed the stories. They said the bell's voice was wind in the reeds, or the groaning of the riverbed in winter. But those who slept near the valley knew otherwise. They said the sound was too measured, too merciful, to belong to nature alone. There are, even now, records of its tone appearing on strange instruments, seismographs that tremble when nothing moves, recording a pulse beneath the earth. Once every few decades, the pattern returns. 3 low oscillations, 1 pause, then a single long vibration, like a bell drawing breath. Engineers try to translate it into numbers, but the rhythm resists. Musicians who hear the recordings describe it as the sound of a door half open, waiting. Some believe the bell never stopped ringing, that its sound has thinned, spread itself across the centuries, echoing through different metals, through pipes and wires, through the hum of power lines and the static between radio stations. That every time a child pauses before sleep, hearing some far vibration and feeling comfort for no reason, it is the bell speaking through the air of time. Others say the bell rings only when the world needs reminding of its own humanity, when the balance between mercy and forgetting grows too fine. That it rang before the plague choirs began their songs, that it rang beneath the cloister light, that its tone lies folded into the same note that hums beneath all our stories, the sound of endurance. It is said that one day soon, when silence gathers again and men argue louder to fill it, the bell will ring once more, clearer, closer, as though the centuries between had been only a breath. Some will hear it as a warning, others as a promise. But those who understand will simply stop, lower their heads, and listen. For the bell has never called people to battle or to prayer. It calls them only to remember, to stand still long enough to hear what still connects the living to the lost. If you walk the valley today, you will find no tower, no stone, no trace of bronze. Only reeds bending in the wind, and a river that carries the reflection of clouds without end. Yet sometimes, when dusk gathers and the air smells of rain, the water trembles with a sound just beyond hearing. Birds lift their heads, the wind stills, and for a single heartbeat the world seems to hold its breath. Then softly, unmistakably, the bell rings. Not loud, not near, but steady, patient, kind. The sound moves outward, folding over forests, threading through cities, echoing through centuries that no longer believe in miracles. It finds its way into open windows, into the ticking of clocks, into the quiet between two strangers who forgive each other without speaking. It rings through history's sleep, reminding it to wake gently. And when the tone fades, it leaves behind a silence so full it feels like love. That is how the story ends, or perhaps begins, with a sound that does not die, only travels. The bell that rang once for a village, then for an empire, then for the world. And still, beneath all that we build and break, it rings, slow, sacred, unseen, marking not time, but tenderness. It is said there is a book that does not begin and does not end, a book that waits where night thins and the first color of morning gathers like breath on glass. No shelf keeps it, no catalog lists it, yet those who have come close to sleep at the right angle, in the right weather, speak of pages that glow as if moonlight had learned the grammar of paper. They call it many names, the liminal manuscript, the quiet ledger, but the oldest name is the simplest, the Book of Unwritten Dawn. It is not bound in leather, nor stitched with thread. It is bound by attention, stitched by the listener's slow pulse. It appears when a life is ready to turn itself gently, not to break and begin again, but to bend into a softer curve. Whispers tell us it waits at the far table of a small room in a monastery that no longer stands, or at the back pew of a chapel whose roof has gone to sky, or upon a plain wooden desk in a lost library beneath the fields, where the air remembers the hands that once turned pages with clean, patient fingers. Others say it rests nowhere at all. It rests in the hour between bells, in the hush after a name is spoken kindly, in the seam where the last dream loosens and the first thought has not yet arrived. The truth is merciful. It rests where you do, when you have learned to sit without asking the world to hurry. The book is thin as a breath yet heavy as a vow. Its cover is the color of unlit water. On the front there is no title, only the faintest embossing, as if a fingertip years ago traced the mark that wanders through these stories like a small, faithful star, the spiral drawn within a circle. When the room is dark, the mark does not shine. When the room is light, it does not darken. It simply waits the way a threshold waits, not requiring feet, only offering shape. If you open it at noon, nothing appears. The pages are pale as the inside of a seashell and smell faintly of resin and rain. If you open it at midnight, lines lift and settle like tide, but they will not keep for eyes too wakeful. The book prefers the borderlands. It likes the last lamp turned low, the window a rib of silver. It likes the murmur of tea cooling in a cup, the slow gathering of a blanket around the shoulders, the hour when old sorrow hums without teeth and becomes a companion instead of a judge. It likes to be opened by hands that have carried wood and bread and grief, hands that know how to hold without clenching. What does it contain? This book that writes itself and unwrites itself and never chooses a final shape. Not doctrine, not the empire of facts that forgets how to bow. It contains the breath patterns of the world's remembering. It contains the quiet light kept beneath a cloistered stone and the kingdom that slipped between two suns and the mirror that remembered what eyes could not and the choir that taught fear how to breathe and the scholar's ink that flowers only under moon and the library the field still guards and the night the stars closed their eyes until a patient voice called them back and the monk who learned to place lamps so shadows could live and the gate that opened inward to the vault, where the earth stores mercy, and the bell that rings when history trembles and tenderness must be counted again. It contains them not as chapters, but as weathers, moving through one another until they are one weather, the climate of endurance. It is said that the first page writes your name as if the world has been pronouncing it correctly all along. The letters do not copy the records in your pocket. They rise in a gentler alphabet, shaped by what you have loved more than by what you have done. Beneath the name is a sentence that does not quite fit into language. You have traveled far enough to rest. The page receives your breath like dew. In the corner, faint as a star in morning haze, a mark appears. A small circle, and within it the beginning of a spiral that does not yet know whether it will be clockwise or kind. The second page is a map of the places inside you that have remained untouched by your own weather. There is a pool with a cracked edge. There is a hill with a bell half buried in grass. There is a corridor lit by lamps that do not care for oil, only for intention. There is a field where wheat keeps a memory of vowels spoken softly, and a coast where a fire thins to smoke and rises until it becomes the Milky Way again. There is a small door that does not open outward. In the margin, a line. Where memory fades, the ground remembers. If you look away and look back, the map has shifted by a fingertip, the way tenderness shifts to make room for what you forgot to bring. Some say the book speaks. Others say it listens so completely that listening becomes language. If it speaks in the voice of the person you are when no one needs you to perform. Your slow voice, your evening voice, the voice that can pronounce the word enough without apology. It tells you a story you already know. That the body is a bell and the bell is a room and the room is a page and the page is a field and the field is a gate and the gate is a breath that has learned it does not have to hurry. It keeps a record of your severances, the times you were asked to be less and refused, the times you were asked to be more and laid the weight down. It writes your wrong turns as paths that led to water. It does not flatter, because flattery is a loud and lonely thing. It witnesses, and when it witnesses, ink the color of just before dawn lifts from the fibers and then fades, not because the record is lost, but because it has been absorbed. The page has taken your story into its paper the way soil takes rain, until it can feed something quietly. You may turn a page and find a bell diagram, a circle drawn with tender imprecision, a single clapper indicated by a dot, lines radiating outward like ripples from a stone. Below, the simplest instructions. Ring once for mercy. Ring twice for remembering. Ring thrice for the stranger at your own door. You may think this is metaphor useful only to the imagination. Then a winter comes, and you wake to a world that has forgotten its shoes. You put the kettle on. You open the book. The diagram hums. The water understands. Another page holds a mirror, not glass. A circle of polished obsidian ink, dark as a night that trusts itself. If you lean too close, your features vanish. If you lean slightly away, you see movement. Not your life, but the lives that have kept yours possible. Hands setting bread to rise at an hour before dawn. Eyes holding you without words when your own went thin. The mirror slides, and a face appears you think you do not know. It is your own, aged by gentleness you have not yet earned, and it is smiling. Beneath the circle, a sentence. Do not try to keep what becomes you by leaving you. The ink dries, the instruction remains. Once, a man carried the book to a battlefield and opened it on a drum. He asked it to record the names that were about to be thrown away. The book did not write. It hummed, low and steady, in a tone that folded the air over the first rank of men until they forgot whose voices were shouting. The fight was postponed for weather that never came. The man returned the book to the quiet from which he had borrowed it and built a hospital with windows large enough for light to relearn the bodies it had feared. Once, a woman brought the book to a birth. She laid it near the basin where cloths waited in the warmth of a bowl and turned for pages without looking. The room gathered its courage around the small, sea-salted cry. When she turned the book back, the pages she had opened were wet. On one, a mark of a foot the size of a thumbprint. On another, a line the length of a breath, straight as an arrow but soft as a lullaby. Lux non moritur. No miracle, only the world performing itself without shame. Once, a city buried the book beneath its courthouse during a fever of certainty. They were afraid of a text that could not be weaponized, that remembered without punishing. The ground kept it as fields keep seeds. Years later, when the city had learned how to bow to its own citizens, a child digging for the pleasure of digging touched the cover. The spine sighed. The court forgot a rule that had never deserved to live and found, beneath its forgetting, a law older than itself. Do not break what kneels to care for you. Not every page is for everyone. A traveler opens to a score made of single tones, no melody, only intervals marked by small moons. He hums them badly. The valley answers with a wind that leaves all the cattle at ease. A widow opens to an almost blank page on which a ring is drawn, and within it a space that refuses to be filled. She lays her ring there and falls asleep for the first time. In the morning the drawing is gone. She is not. A child opens to a field of dots. She connects them and makes a door where no door has been. The book does not thank her. It does not need to. She has understood the leisure of meaning. There are warnings. The book does not like hurry. It closes itself if you walk toward it like a conqueror. It misplaces its own pages when you bring it into rooms where cruelty is a language. If you ask it to choose for you, it goes blank. If you ask it to absolve you, it folds its cover and rests its weight on your palm until your arm understands what fatigue can teach. Set it down, phrase your question as if speaking to a sleeping child, and wait. It has never failed anyone who could wait long enough to hear themselves soften. Sometimes the book is empty for a season. You open it with reverence and find only light. Do not be ashamed. Some lives need the medicine of blankness. Some nights ask for a library in which every book has slipped from its binding to become air. When the pages return, they do so as quietly as they left, with a sentence that sounds like you're breathing. Now we can carry more gently. Who writes it? This is the sweet uncertainty. There is a hand in it that has built monasteries and bells and gates and the patience of shadows. There is a hand in it that remembers fields and whales and the stitched sleep of foxes in winter. There is a hand in it that has your mother's steadiness and your father's best silence and the precision of the teacher who taught you to tie your laces in a room that smelled of chalk and kindness. There is your hand in it now, even if you are certain you are not ready. Especially if you are certain you are not ready. The last pages are always unwritten. They do not refuse you. They invite you with a shyness older than faith. If you stare, they cloud. If you blink slowly, they clear. If you touch them with a finger, the paper warms. If you press your ear to them, you may hear a sound you have been confusing with silence your entire life. The low bell of your own endurance. It rings once for mercy. It rings twice for remembering. It rings thrice for the stranger at your own door. You open the door. The stranger is the day. Perhaps it was never a book. Perhaps it is the manner by which morning learns your name again each time you wake. Perhaps the spiral within the circle is not an emblem but a way of walking. Outward to learn, inward to mend, outward to serve, inward to rest, the line never crossing itself, always returning a hair's width closer to the center without ever claiming to own it. Perhaps dawn is not a time but a technique. The world arriving without injury. You close the cover. The room remains. The air tastes like the inside of a shell, saline and sweet. The lamp leans a little as if to listen when you stand. At the window, night lifts like a page turned with careful hands. The color over the roofs is not yet gold. Not yet blue. It is the color of patience. Somewhere a bell chooses not to ring because silence is ringing well enough. Somewhere the gate beneath a floor draws one slow breath and sleeps again. Somewhere the field writes a single line in dew and erases it with feet that will never know they were reading. Somewhere a choir practices the vowel that means stay. Somewhere a mirror darkens and becomes a door for a grief that has learned how to be generous. You will carry the book without carrying it. Your ribs will learn to make room for it the way shelves make room for the next reader. Your hands will place light down so shadows can keep their shape. Your voice will remember how to hum for stars that grow tired. Your steps will remember the buried road. You will forget the exact sentences as you should. Their work is not to be quoted. Their work is to loosen and soften and share their weight with the world until weight feels like belonging. If someone asks what it said, you will shrug and pour tea and touch their wrist when it trembles. You will leave a chair open at the table and an extra bowl for the unnamed. You will stand sometimes with your palm on stone and feel warmth where there should be none and call it by no name and guard it as if it were an ember because sometimes it will be. You will sleep when you can and forgive yourself when you cannot and practice the oldest liturgy of breathing until your house hums with what the pages meant. And on the night when you are most tired and least alone, because even loneliness is company when named gently, you will turn toward the window. The sky will be the color of unwritten dawn. In the glass you will see no face, only the room and the lamp and the small circle on the cover where your hand just rested. And behind that, hardly there, a spiral widening. Not a command, not a prophecy. A motion, a way of carrying time that does not wound it. You will say aloud, though no one is listening, the sentence the book wrote on the first page and then dissolved as if it had never been. You have traveled far enough to rest. The room will accept this as weather. The bell within your chest will answer once, twice, thrice, each tone softer than the last, each tone clearer than the one before. Somewhere the fields will turn their faces toward the color that has not yet chosen its name. Somewhere monks will open a door that opens within. Somewhere a child will connect dots that were not there yesterday and make a door you will one day walk through. You will sleep. The book will remain open though the cover is closed. Morning will arrive not as victory but as permission. And what was hidden will not need to be found, because it has always been here, beneath the silence. The light that does not die, the memory that does not punish, the gate that does not lock, the bell that does not end, the page that does not need to be written to be read. Dawn will touch the room like a hand that remembers your face before you learn to wear it. The first small noises of day, bird, kettle, footstep, breath, will take their places on the staff. The hymn will not begin. It will already be playing. and you will rise inside it as if into a text no one will bind. The unwritten chapter that knows how to read you back to yourself, softly, marked by the moon, guided by the star that is not in the sky but in your keeping. The book does not close. It rests, and the day like a page turns.